So most people think you need a full Bitcoin to be rich. But today I want to be talking about why I think you only need 10% of a Bitcoin to not only change your life, but potentially retire in the next 5 years. The 3 simulations we're going to be looking at today is going to help to show us that yes, 0.1 Bitcoin will change your life even if you're living in some of the most expensive cities in the world. Now look, most people understand that there will only be 21 million of these, but most people don't understand that 19.8 million of all of the Bitcoin that'll ever be created have already been mined and pushed out into circulation. That means that today, 94% of all of the Bitcoin that'll ever be created has already been mined and distributed, and that means that there is only 6% of the total Bitcoin supply left to be distributed and mined for the rest of the world over the next 115 years. This crazy statistic is really explained really nicely by this chart that shows that every single 4 years, less and less and less Bitcoin will be mined and distributed to the network. Now this chart's also an interesting one because it really does highlight the fact of how powerful compound interest is and how it's going to really sneak up on us. Because right now a lot of people are kind of like, yeah, yawn, I don't care, Luke. Still 4% of the entire 21 million Bitcoin supply will be mined over the next 115 years. It doesn't sound that scary, right? I mean, over the next 4 years, around 400,000 Bitcoin is going to be mined. We know that about 450 of these puppies is mined every single day. And that's because the block reward paid to the miners every 10 minutes today, it's 3.125 Bitcoin. But if we fast forward just 11 years into the future to 2036, things have changed dramatically. All of a sudden, the block reward paid to the miners every 10 minutes is only 0.19 Bitcoin. That's about 20% of one of these. And things get even more crazy if you think about the entire 4-year window between 2036 and 2040. In that entire 4-year window, only 39,000 Bitcoin is going to be mined. Now again, big number, I get it. But let's think about the news that I saw come across my desk this morning. A brand new public company headed by Jack Mallers and Howard Lutnick announced, yes, okay, we are now going to become a MicroStrategy copycat and we have 42,000 Bitcoin on our treasury. This is one company. One public company has 42,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And again, it's only the 3rd largest public company. This amount, 40,000 Bitcoin, is going to be all of the Bitcoin that is mined over a 4-year period between 2036 and 2040. Now again, it's crazy because 99% of all of the Bitcoin that'll ever be created will have been mined by 2036. Now again, I get it, 2036, it's 11 years away, Luke. Why are you talking about such urgency and the need to get to 0.1 Bitcoin or even 1% of a Bitcoin, 0.01 Bitcoin today? There's no urgency. I'll always be able to buy my Bitcoin on Coinbase, won't I? Well, I'm not so sure because this next chart that I'm looking at right now is really concerning to me because we can see that 900,000 Bitcoin has actually left the exchanges over the past 2 years. And this is concerning for multiple reasons. The first being the fact that have a look at what that white line of Bitcoin's been doing over those past 2 years while the exchanges have been drained. Bitcoin's been going up. Typically, we don't actually see the coins on exchanges decrease during a bull run. When we have a look at the past 4 Bitcoin 4-year cycles, this is the first time we've ever seen price going up with coins on exchanges going down consistently over a multi-year time horizon. We've never seen it before. So again, this is interesting and really causes you to just scratch the little or fuse hairs you might have on your chin and say, what is going on? What is different? We are going to be having a look at what is different here in a moment, but I want to really put a stamp on this one because let's run the numbers. Let's extrapolate out the new trend that began in 2020. Now, this is why I'm really urging people to study Bitcoin today and just begin accumulating even a little bit of Bitcoin today because we can see something change in 2020. Very clear. For the first time in Bitcoin's life, coins started leaving the exchanges and it's been doing so for 5 years in a row now. So if we assume this trend, this 5-year trend, continues for the next 5 years, what's going to happen? What happens if 900,000 Bitcoin is ripped off the exchanges every 2 years, like what's happened since the end of 2022? Well, there's only 2.5 million Bitcoin on exchanges, and all of a sudden we got no Bitcoin on exchanges by mid 2029. This is again why I'm urging people to study Bitcoin today, buy Bitcoin today, because I think the supply side of the equation is dramatically changing. It's rapidly changing. And we do know the reason why trying to buy even just 10% of one of these is so powerful, and I think it can be so life-changing in the future, is that when you hold 10% on one of these, nobody's going to be able to create any more Bitcoin. If you manage to get your hands on even 10% of a Bitcoin, if the entire 21 million Bitcoin supply is distributed evenly amongst the 8 billion people, only 210 million people will be able to get their hands on 0.1 Bitcoin. Now again, big numbers, I get it. Let's put things into comparison. Today, there's somewhere around 50 to 60 million millionaires around the world. And hey, I mean, if you got $1 million, you can live pretty nicely in most countries around the world. You are certainly in the upper class. You're a high class citizen, so to say. So again, if you can buy enough Bitcoin, and that puts you in a class where only 210 million people could ever hold 10% of a Bitcoin, you're doing pretty nicely. But again, this isn't the entire truth. This gets me into the second point I want to look at that explains why 0.1 Bitcoin could be so life-changing, and that is the fact that not all Bitcoin is distributed evenly, and the demand for Bitcoin, it's rapidly changing. Now, this graphic here really highlights the fact that not all the Bitcoin supply will be available for sale. Look at how much Bitcoin is already sitting on the balance sheets of governments, ETFs, corporations, and billionaires. It's a lot of Bitcoin. And even over the past 15 months, since the ETFs were launched in the biggest market in the world, America, these ETFs have already gobbled up over 1.3 million Bitcoin. That's more than 6% of the entire Bitcoin supply, gobbled up in only 15 months. So another reason why I think people are a little bit sleeping behind the wheel, so to say, is they're not really thinking, okay, what happens in another 15 months? Will the ETFs buy another 1.2, 1.3 million coins? Can they even buy that much? What does the world look like as other nation states try to respond to Donald Trump's announcement of a strategic Bitcoin reserve in America, the country with the global reserve currency? I think when we start running all of these calculations, you might slowly but surely begin to believe me when I say that, hey, you might only need 0.1 of a Bitcoin to change your life in the future, because I think the demand side of the equation, as we're about to look at, is fundamentally changing. And then the maths gets even more wonky when you start thinking about the public corporations who have publicly put Bitcoin on the balance sheet over the past 3 years. We know that public corporations hold over 500,000 Bitcoin at the time of recording. And again, big numbers, I get it. Let's put things in a perspective. 500,000 Bitcoin, it's another 2.5% of the Bitcoin supply. So really, when we start thinking about things, the majority of those 500,000 coins were bought in the past 2 years, and all of the buying coming from these ETFs, it's also happened in the past year and a half. So nearly 10% of the entire Bitcoin network has been bought up solely from the Bitcoin ETFs and public corporations in the past 2 years. What happens in the next 2 years? Are these guys going to buy another 10% of the network? Are they going to be able to buy another 10% of the network? Again, I don't know. Again, these are extrapolations. These are assumptions. Who knows? Maybe Bitcoin dies and it goes to zero over the next 2 years. I don't think that's the most likely outcome. But again, there are no certainties in life. There are only probabilities. And I think the probabilities of Bitcoin being under $100,000, I think they're pretty low, which is why I always encourage you guys to get your ducks in a row. If you need help buying large amounts of Bitcoin and getting your hand held along the way, I always encourage you guys to check out what the Bitcoin Well are doing. You can book a call with a specialist at the Bitcoin Well who will help you buy your generational wealth. But they'll do more than that. They'll even teach you how you should be storing your Bitcoin, which is why I'm such a massive proponent of what the Bitcoin Well is doing. They're an exchange that forces you to take self-custody, and that's what it's all about, because there's no point talking about all these crazy Bitcoin price predictions and talking about why 0.1 Bitcoin will make you rich if you don't know how to actually hold the Bitcoin, okay? So many people, when Bitcoin's at $1 million, $5 million, $10 million in the future, they're going to think, okay, I'm good. I can withdraw my Bitcoin from Coinbase or Binance, and they'll think that they have their generational wealth. But I'm afraid that a lot of people will be shown the exit door, or they'll be told, sorry, you can no longer access your Bitcoin. That's a conversation probably for another day. But again, if we are talking about all these really bullish predictions and future projections for Bitcoin, you can only really participate in these projections if you hold your Bitcoin and if you hold your own key. If you do not hold your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, you don't own your Bitcoin. Now, again, I think there are a ton of great hardware wallets to use when it comes to self-custodying your Bitcoin. I've used them all. I think they're all great. Again, I think a Trezor is a great option for somebody looking for a great Bitcoin-only hardware wallet that is completely open source. Again, they have open source code base. You can verify all the lines of code that you want if you want that kind of extra security. Again, I think Trezor, they have a great option. They've got the Trezor Safe 3, the Trezor Safe 5s. You guys can even get a discount on a Trezor if you use the link down below in the description. Now, again, if you want something a little bit more advanced and a little bit more fancy, I have another option for you guys to check out. You can get your hands on a Ledger. Ledger has a ton of different options. Again, I know some of you guys want a touchscreen hardware wallet. It's easier to use than the ones with the little buttons, which is why I recommend the Ledger Flexes or the Ledger Stacks. And you guys can get $10 of free Bitcoin if you use the link down below to buy a Ledger. And they also do have the Ledger Nano S's and the Ledger Nano X's. So again, please do what the nation states cannot do, and that is take self-custody of your Bitcoin. And the final reminder I've got for you guys is to, once you've got your own hardware wallet, please back up your Bitcoin the way it should be backed up, and that is on titanium. Go and get as many titanium plates as you want from Stampseed. And again, you can get 15% off anything you want to buy from those guys. You can use that promo code Luke15 to take advantage of that cheeky little discount. Okay, now that you're back, let's talk about how little Bitcoin you actually need to retire and change your life, even if you're living in some of the most expensive cities in the world. So as we can see, I've got a little bit of an Excel spreadsheet here. And what I've got is the most expensive cities listed at the very top of this spreadsheet. Of course, we're looking at cities from all around the world. We're taking a zoomed out approach and a zoomed out look at the entire world here. I do want this video to be applicable for the most amount of people as possible. So we're looking at Hong Kong, we're looking at Singapore, we're looking at Sydney, Melbourne, we're looking at LA, we're looking at Toronto in the Great North. We're even going to be looking at London and a few other major cities in Europe. And we're going to be forecasting what might be the amount of money that you need to retire in these cities, say in 10, 20, and 30 years' time. So we can see this really cool little graphic. It shows us the different amounts of money that you need to retire in each one of these cities. Now let's make a simple projection and extrapolation. The global money supply over the past 50 years has expanded at 7% per year. This means that the prices of houses, food, rent, health insurance, education, on average, it has been increasing at around that 7% margin in most regions around the world. Obviously, there's averages. There are exceptions to the rule. Technology can be deflationary. Education and tuition prices can be more inflationary than that 7% figure, but 7% is the number that I want to use to project out how much money you're going to need to retire in 10 or 20 years' time. So what I've got here is the top 20 most expensive cities in the entire world to retire in. On average, you can see in some cities like Switzerland, you need about 250,000 euros to retire. In other cities, you might need a little bit less than 200,000. I thought, hey, let's take the average. Let's assume you need $200,000 to retire in some of the most expensive places around the world. Then let's assume in 20 years, the money supply continues to expand at 7% per year. All of a sudden, you can see what that magical little thing about compound interest has done and has changed about our little retirement conundrum. Now, all of a sudden, we need 773,000 euros to retire. Again, let's convert that to dollars for our American friends. That's nearly $900,000 of chump change that you're going to be needing to retire. Now, where does Bitcoin fit into this equation? So $900,000 for retirement. It's a lot of chump change. Well, you guys might really be scratching your head at the moment thinking, hang on a minute, this lunatic's talking about 0.1 Bitcoin being life-changing. How's 0.1 Bitcoin gonna save me from a $900,000 retirement crisis? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's pull out ChatGPT and now let's run some compounded annual growth rates for Bitcoin. And let's crunch the numbers. So again, I was more conservative and fair to the fiat system in that calculation I ran. I actually think the global monetary supply is going to have to expand at much more than 7% per year for the next 20 years. Again, I've talked about why I believe we're at the end of an 80-year long-term debt cycle and why money supply always has to be expanded at an exponentially higher rate after interest rates hit zero. That is not within the scope of today's video, but I was conservative for the expansion of the money supply. Now let's be conservative for our numbers that we're going to be running with this Bitcoin side of the equation. So we can see Bitcoin's CAGR since inception, it's around 100% per year. That means Bitcoin doubles every single year on average, and it's been doing that for 16 years straight. Yes, sometimes Bitcoin goes up by 500% in a year. Sometimes Bitcoin crashes by 80% in a year. We're not interested in the short-term volatility and the noise. We're interested in the trend. And if this trend continues, you're going to need a whole lot less Bitcoin than you could ever imagine. But I want to be conservative. Let's not use this 90% CAGR number. Let's not even be conservative and use a 50% CAGR. Let's use a 40% CAGR. Let's assume Bitcoin can continue appreciating at 40% per year for, again, that same time window, the next 20 years. When you run those assumptions, I plugged them into ChatGPT earlier, and all of a sudden, one Bitcoin would be $94 million per coin if Bitcoin only has a CAGR of 40% per year for the next 20 years. Now, I know that's mind-boggling, but that's one Bitcoin. A lot of people would be thinking, Luke, but one Bitcoin today, it's about 100,000 big ones. I can't afford one Bitcoin. Like I promised in the beginning of the intro, I do think 0.1 Bitcoin can be life-changing. And 0.1 Bitcoin in 20 years' time, under this hypothetical scenario, again, this is just a thought experiment, 0.1 Bitcoin would be worth $9.4 million. And all of a sudden, that $900,000 retirement crisis that you are going to be faced with, even if you're living in some of the most expensive cities around the world, if you've got just 0.1 Bitcoin, I think you can avoid that retirement crisis. But that, of course, lies upon the assumption that you actually buy your Bitcoin today. And again, a lot of people are saying, okay, 0.1 Bitcoin could be worth $9.4 million, but how many people could actually buy 0.1 Bitcoin? How many people could buy 0.01 Bitcoin? Well, I'm here to tell you, probably going to be less people than you think. And that's all because of something called a power law with the name of a Pareto's principle. If you do want to learn how many people could actually be a part of the top 1%, or even the new millionaire class on a Bitcoin standard, and how much of a Bitcoin you might need to get in that top 1%, you guys are in luck because I recently filmed a video on that topic. I'm going to put a link to that video somewhere around there. And with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you all in the next one.